Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real privilege to be with you all at Bridges and Meridian and to see old friends, Kareem, Kathy, Al, and to talk about a subject of such worldwide significance, which is economic development in the broader Middle East. I think what I'd like to do is pick up on something that Tom Friedman referred to in his remarks, to the effect that what has to happen in these countries, and it is by no means a monolithic or homogeneous region, as Stuart points out, it's about tapping in to the people. That's the strongest, best resource base that any country, any economy, and certainly each of those countries and economies in the Middle East has. But the challenges, whatever they were before the global financial crisis, as this has unfolded and cascaded in waves around the world over the course of the past two and a half years, if they weren't big enough before, they're even bigger today. They're bigger today for a number of reasons. Simply, for one, the math, economic growth, broadly speaking, in the region was probably 5-6% per annum in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. Now, current estimates, at best, kind of tailing off to the 2-3% area for 2009, looking into 2010. They're also compounded by the fact that Stuart referred to the international debt situation and all the preoccupation of governments around the world and the developing world with debt burdens in the private sector, in the public sector, and the reshuffling and working off of those debt burdens, which in turn puts pressure on those governments to focus more at home and less elsewhere, and in terms of their development and other efforts directed at friends and partner countries such as those in the broader Middle East. But broadly put, on the economic development sphere, there are several major challenges that policymakers, certainly in the region, it's particularly humbling for me to talk about these issues in Kareem's presence and others, who's steeped in this as a public official and has put heart and soul into addressing these very challenges. But in the interest of oversimplifying what's at stake and kind of the issue sets that need to be worked at, and that policymakers, not just in the region, but development experts in the NGO community, the multilateral institutions in the United States government are thinking about. They start with education, which is a good place to start, since that's what Bridges is all about in this forum. I mean, their literacy rates are across the map in the various countries of the broader Middle East. Egypt alone, adult literacy is something less than 60%. And the government has done a very good job, a credible job, of increasing those numbers over time. There's also a challenge, even as educational systems get further developed, of matching the skill sets of those who emerge from secondary education, university education, to the needs of the population and the society to support broader, sustainable economic development. The best example, it's probably anecdotal, I couldn't verify this independently, but I read it somewhere. Saudi Arabia, they need like 1,000 pharmacists a year. They produce 100 people capable of being pharmacists. That means they've got to import 900 people who went to pharmaceutical school somewhere else. I mean, that's the kind of challenge educationally that needs to be addressed over time. And obviously, I'm not saying anything that the governments in the region and responsible citizens aren't painfully aware of. But it's an absolutely critical area of support where the United States and other countries who have an interest, private citizens and NGOs and government, can play a critical role. Tom also said something interesting about, when he's talking about Pakistan, it resonates and ties in with education. If there was one thing that's of enduring value, it's these cultural and educational exchanges that Meridian does with countries in the Middle East and around the world, US government supports, because that's the longest term, most productive investment, one of the most productive investments countries can make in their long-term strategic, economic, political relationship. When Tom mentioned we cut off Pakistan, one of the things, and that applies on the civilian side, it applies on the military side. Pakistan, for various reasons, going back to history that I won't relate, we cut off educational exchanges or military to military training programs during a sustained period. We did this with a couple other countries in the 80s. Well, guess what? There's a whole generation of military leadership that's come of age in some of these countries, Pakistan included. Do we know those people in the same way that we knew prior generations, the senior levels of our military? Well, yes and no, but there's a deficiency there. But the important point here is that education matters, and it's a long-term, critical underpinning to development, no less so in the Middle East than it is, in fact, in our own country. Secondly, on jobs. You know the statistics, and they're really tough. If unemployment in the world generally is something like 6% on average, these are pre-global economic crisis, all these numbers that go off the charts for 2008, 2009, off the charts in the wrong direction. Broader Middle East, 15%. Youth unemployment, age 15 to 24, world generally, like 14, 15%. Broader Middle East, 25%. And of course, that's disproportionately weighted towards women where those numbers would be even higher. So there's a tremendous challenge of creating the jobs, the 80 million that Stuart referred to. Egypt alone, 1 million jobs a year. So what has to happen? This is where government policy is very much directed at a lot of fronts, but private sector development is absolutely critical. It's broadening and diversifying the economic base and tapping into the real talent pool of the indigenous, the local populations. And Kareem's been on the forefront of this, developing technology efforts and industries in Jordan. You see similar efforts being undertaken to varying degrees in others of the country, in the region, but those are efforts that need external support. They need development assistance from the international community. They need private sector business assistance in terms of investing and trading, and they need bilateral governmental assistance and support. One of the things that the United States government has done, and we've sort of proceeded, our government's proceeded in fits and starts in this area over the years, is finding ways, creative ways to broaden and deepen the trading and investment relationship with the Middle East. We have a free trade agreement with Jordan, we have one with Bahrain, we have one with the UAE. There are these very complex legal structures, but they worked. They're not perfect, but the QIZs in Egypt and Israel, that type of activity, yes, it's in U.S. interest, but it's also extremely important in supporting bringing capital in to support private sector development. The final issue I'd touch on before turning it back to Stuart is the whole area of institutional reform. And this is sort of a broad rubric for governments continuing to build their own capacity to govern. It's educating public servants, it's building the foundations of the rule of law, constantly strengthening them. It's simplifying the bureaucracy. It's doing what they can to cut out corruption and bad behaviors. And none of that's easy. It's extremely hard. It's long-term blocking and tackling, so to speak. But it's absolutely critical, again, coming back to something that Tom Friedman referred to win the confidence of the people, to create that context where people and businesses, the private sectors, other countries, donors, NGOs, et cetera, want to be there to support the region. All that said, having traveled, someone who's traveled quite a bit in the Middle East, I have to say it's a region of tremendous promise and opportunity. We saw it on those little girls' faces in the video. I was gratified to hear some of Tom's comments about Iraq. I was in Iraq for a couple of weeks in October and couldn't underscore some of the things he said more firmly. But it's not going to happen by itself. It needs the support of institutions like Bridges, of Meridian, concerted governmental support from the friends and those of the countries in the region, and also deep, sustained private sector engagement.